The church slowly emptied after Victoria was led away by Detective Rodriguez. Some guests came up to Dad and offered awkward condolences like someone had died instead of a wedding being stopped. Others just left quickly, probably eager to get home and tell everyone they knew about the most dramatic wedding ceremony they'd ever attended. Daniel sat in the front pew with his grandmother while Dad talked to Reverend Matthews and a few close friends. His hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, and he felt completely exhausted like he'd just run a marathon. "You did good, sweetheart," Grandma Helen said softly, putting her arm around him. "I know that wasn't easy." "I thought Dad was going to hate me," Daniel admitted. His eyes felt puffy from crying and his dress shirt was uncomfortable and too tight around the collar. "He could never hate you," Grandma Helen said. "He was just hurt and confused. Sometimes people get so caught up in wanting something to be true that they ignore all the signs telling them it isn't." Detective Rodriguez came back into the church about 20 minutes later. He approached Dad, who was sitting alone in a pew now, staring at nothing. "Mr. Martinez, can I have a word?" Dad looked up, his eyes red. "Is this really happening? Or am I going to wake up and find out this was all a nightmare?" "I'm afraid it's real," the detective said, not unkindly. He sat down next to Dad. "We've been tracking Victoria Mendoza as she's known in our system for about 18 months. She's suspected of running romance scams across 3 states. The pattern is always the same. She meets a man, usually someone who's recently lost a spouse or gone through a difficult time, gains their trust quickly, gets access to their finances, and then disappears with whatever she can steal." Dad put his head in his hands. "How could I have been so stupid?" "You weren't stupid," Detective Rodriguez said. "These people are professionals. They're good at what they do. They know exactly how to find vulnerable targets and exactly what to say to make them feel special. You're not the first person she's fooled, and unfortunately, you probably wouldn't have been the last if your son hadn't caught on." Dad looked over at Daniel, and there was something in his expression that Daniel hadn't seen in a long time. Pride, maybe, or respect. "What happens now?" Dad asked the detective. "We'll need you to come to the station sometime this week to give a formal statement. We'll also need to go through your financial records to see if any theft has already occurred. From what your son described, it sounds like Victoria was still in the planning stages, which means you might have caught this before any real damage was done." "What about Kevin, the person she was texting with?" Daniel asked, speaking up for the first time. Detective Rodriguez smiled at him. "Smart kid. We've been looking for Kevin Turner for a while, too. He's Victoria's partner. They've been running the scam together. Once we arrested Victoria, she tried to cut a deal, gave up Kevin's location in exchange for a reduced sentence. We picked him up about half an hour ago." "So it's over?" Dad asked. "They can't come back and try again?" "It's over," the detective confirmed. "Victoria's looking at serious jail time, especially with multiple victims across state lines. This is federal fraud we're talking about. She won't be scamming anyone for a long time." After the detective left, Dad, Daniel, and Grandma Helen sat in the empty church, none of them quite ready to leave yet. The flowers were still on the altar, the candles still burning. It was supposed to be a celebration, and instead it had turned into something none of them would ever forget. "I need to apologize," Dad said finally, looking at both of them. "I was a terrible father and a terrible son. You both tried to warn me and I got angry instead of listening. I was so desperate to move on from your mother's death to feel happy again that I ignored every red flag." "You weren't terrible," Daniel said. "You were just sad. And she was really good at pretending." "That doesn't excuse it," Dad said. "You're 12 years old, and you had to be the adult in this situation." "That's not right." "That's not how it's supposed to work." Grandma Helen reached over and took her son's hand. "Robert, you've been through something incredibly difficult. Losing your wife, raising a child alone, trying to rebuild your life. Victoria took advantage of that vulnerability. But you need to forgive yourself. And more importantly, you need to deal with the grief properly instead of trying to run from it." Dad nodded slowly. "I know, I thought I was fine, but I wasn't. I'm not. I miss her so much, Mom, every day. And when Victoria came along and made me feel something other than sad for the first time in years, I just grabbed onto it without thinking." "I miss her too," Daniel said quietly. "But I don't want you to replace her. I just want you to be okay." Dad pulled Daniel close again. "I'm going to be okay. We're going to be okay. But it's going to take time and I'm going to get some help. Real help. Therapy probably. Because today made me realize that I've been running away from dealing with everything. and that's not fair to either of us. They finally left the church as the sun was starting to set. The wedding reception had been canceled, obviously, though Dad would still have to pay for the venue and the caterers. He said he didn't care about the money. He was just grateful that Daniel had been brave enough to speak up. The next few weeks were strange. Dad had to go to the police station multiple times to give statements and go through his financial records. It turned out Victoria had managed to steal about $8,000 by transferring money in small amounts that Dad hadn't noticed. The police said they might be able to recover some of it, but probably not all. $8,000 is a lot, Dad had said when they found out. But it could have been so much worse. After the wedding, once she had legal access to everything, she could have wiped me out completely. The story made the local news. A reporter called asking for an interview, but Dad declined. He didn't want Daniel's face on television. Didn't want their family drama turned into entertainment for strangers. Some of Dad's co-workers found out anyway, and there were a few awkward conversations at his office, but mostly people were supportive. The hardest part was dealing with the emotional aftermath. Dad had really believed he loved Victoria, and even knowing she was a con artist didn't immediately erase those feelings. He went through waves of anger, embarrassment, and sadness. He started seeing a therapist twice a week like he'd promised. Daniel went to a few therapy sessions too. His therapist, Dr. Chen, helped him process everything that had happened. She told him that what he'd done took tremendous courage, but that it was also a heavy burden for a kid to carry. You shouldn't have had to be the one to protect your father, Dr. Chen said. That wasn't your responsibility. But you did it anyway, and that shows incredible strength of character. Just make sure you're taking care of yourself too, okay? Grandma Helen moved in with them for a few months, helping to create a sense of stability while Dad worked through his issues. She cooked dinner every night, helped Daniel with homework, and made sure Dad actually went to his therapy appointments instead of making excuses. About 2 months after the wedding that never was, Dad came into Daniel's room one evening and sat on the edge of his bed. Daniel was doing homework, or trying to, but mostly he was just doodling in the margins of his notebook. "I want to show you something," Dad said. He pulled out his phone and opened the Photos app. On the screen was a picture of Mom, one Daniel had seen before. She was in the garden, laughing at something off camera, her hands covered in dirt from planting those roses she loved so much. "I've been going through old photos in therapy," Dad said. "Dr. Peters thinks it's important to remember her properly, not to try to forget or move past it too quickly. And I realized something. I was so afraid of being sad that I tried to replace her instead of just missing her." "Does that make sense?" Daniel nodded. "I think so. Your mom was special," Dad continued. "She was funny and kind, and she loved us so much. And when she died, part of me died too. I thought finding someone new would fix that empty feeling. But that's not how it works. The empty feeling is there because she mattered. And that's okay. Do you think you'll ever want to date again?" Daniel asked. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to ask that, but he was curious. Dad smiled a little. "Maybe someday. But not for a long time. And definitely not until I've done the work to heal properly. And when I do, I promise I'll listen if you have concerns. I'll listen to Mom too." He gestured at Grandma Helen's room down the hall. "No more ignoring red flags just because I want something to be true. Promise?" Daniel asked. "Promise," Dad said. He held out his pinky finger, and Daniel linked his own with it, the way they used to do when Daniel was little and they made important promises to each other. School became easier too. Daniel had been worried that everyone would find out about the wedding and make fun of him, but Tyler and his other friends were actually pretty supportive. Tyler's parents had gotten divorced when he was 8, so he understood family drama. "At least your dad didn't marry her," Tyler said one day at lunch. "My mom married a guy who turned out to be secretly gambling away all their money. They were together for 3 years before she found out. Your dad's better off figuring it out before the wedding." Daniel had never thought about it that way, but Tyler was right. As terrible as everything had been, it could have been worse. 3 months after the wedding, Daniel got called to the principal's office. He spent the whole walk there trying to figure out what he'd done wrong, running through every possible rule he might have broken. But when he got there was a woman waiting who looked vaguely familiar. "Daniel, this is Mrs. Rodriguez," Principal Thompson said. "She wanted to speak with you." Daniel realized with a start that this must be Detective Rodriguez's wife or relative or something. The woman smiled warmly at him. "I'm a reporter for the county newspaper," she explained. I heard about what you did stopping that wedding and helping catch Victoria Mendoza. I wanted to write a story about it. Not for the crime section, but for our Young Heroes feature. We highlight kids who do brave things in the community. Daniel's first instinct was to say no. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a kid who'd ruined his dad's wedding and made everything weird and complicated. But then he thought about the detective's words about how Victoria had hurt other people before Dad, and would have hurt more people if she hadn't been stopped. "Can you not use my full name?" Daniel asked. "Or show my picture?" "We can work with that," Mrs. Rodriguez agreed. "How about just your first name and age? And no photos?" The article came out 2 weeks later. It was a short piece about a 12-year-old boy who'd trusted his instincts and protected his father from a con artist. It mentioned Victoria's arrest and the detective work that Daniel and his grandmother had done. At the end, there was a quote from Detective Rodriguez. "This young man potentially saved his father's life savings and possibly his life. Victoria Mendoza and her partner were dangerous individuals, and this kid stopped them. That takes real courage." Dad framed the article and put it on the wall in the hallway right next to Daniel's school photos and his soccer team pictures. Every time Daniel walked past it, he felt a complicated mix of pride and embarrassment. 6 months after the wedding, things started to feel almost normal again. Dad was still in therapy, but he seemed lighter somehow, less weighed down. He'd started cooking again, even made pancakes one Sunday morning. They weren't as good as the ones he used to make before Mom died, but they were pretty close. Grandma Helen moved back to her apartment, though she still came over for dinner twice a week. The house felt quieter without her, but in a peaceful way rather than a sad way. Daniel was doing better too. His grades improved, he made the school soccer team, and he didn't wake up with nightmares about Victoria anymore. Dr. Chen said he was processing the trauma in a healthy way. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel and Dad went to visit Mom's grave. They hadn't been in a while, not since before Victoria came into their lives. Dad brought fresh flowers, roses like the ones Mom used to grow. "Hey, honey," Dad said softly, kneeling by the headstone. "Sorry it's been so long. Things got complicated for a while there, but we're okay now. Daniel took care of us. You'd be so proud of him." Daniel knelt down too, running his fingers over Mom's name carved in the stone. "Hi, Mom, I miss you. Dad almost married someone terrible, but I stopped it. Grandma helped. I think you would have known Victoria was bad news right away. You were always good at reading people." They sat there for a while in comfortable silence, just being near her. When they finally left, Dad put his arm around Daniel's shoulders. "You know what I realized?" Dad said as they walked to the car. "I spent so long trying to fill the empty space your mom left behind that I forgot I didn't have to fill it alone. I had you and Mom and our memories and our love for each other. That was enough." "It is enough. Does that mean you're okay now?" Daniel asked. Dad thought about it. "I'm getting there. Some days are harder than others. But yeah, I think I'm going to be okay. We both are." A year after the wedding that never happened, Daniel turned 13. Dad threw him a small birthday party with his friends, and Grandma Helen made her famous chocolate cake. Tyler and the others played video games and ate too much pizza, and for a few hours everything felt perfectly normal and right. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Dad came into Daniel's room with a wrapped present. "I wanted to give you this one in private," he said. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a nice pen. On the first page, Dad had written, "For Daniel, thank you for being braver than I was. Thank you for protecting our family. Thank you for being the man your mother raised you to be. Love, Dad." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. "Thanks, Dad. Your mom used to keep a journal," Dad said. She said writing things down helped her process her thoughts and feelings. "I thought maybe it might help you too. Everything you went through this year, everything you did, that's worth remembering, but it's also worth working through." Daniel nodded, running his hand over the smooth leather cover. "Do you think Mom would be proud of me?" Dad smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "I know she would be. I am too. You saved me, Daniel, not just from Victoria, but from myself. You reminded me what's really important, and that's worth more than all the money in the world." They hugged, and Daniel felt something inside him settle. The grief over Mom would always be there. He understood that now. And the trauma from the Victoria situation would take more time to fully process. But they were going to be okay. Not perfect, not fixed, but okay. And sometimes okay was enough. That night, Daniel opened his new journal and wrote his first entry. He wrote about Mom and how much he missed her. He wrote about Victoria and the wedding and how scared he'd been. He wrote about Dad and therapy and slowly healing. And he wrote about the future, about soccer games and school dances and all the normal things he hoped would fill the coming years. On the last line of the page, he wrote, "Being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs to be done even though you're terrified. Mom taught me that. And today I finally understand what she meant." He closed the journal and turned off his light, feeling more at peace than he had in months. Outside his window, the stars were bright, and somewhere out there he liked to think Mom was watching over them, proud of the family they were slowly becoming again. The morning of the wedding, Daniel woke up feeling like he might throw up. He'd barely slept, tossing and turning all night, playing out different scenarios in his head. What would he say? How would Dad react? Would anyone even listen to him? Dad knocked on his door at 7 in the morning. "Time to get up, buddy." Big day. Daniel wanted to say so many things. He wanted to grab his dad and shake him and make him see what was happening. But Dad's voice sounded happy, excited even, and Daniel couldn't bring himself to start another fight. "Yeah, okay," Daniel said. "I'll be down in a minute." The morning passed in a blur. Dad was too busy to really talk, getting ready and making phone calls about last-minute wedding details. Victoria wasn't there. Apparently, she'd spent the night at a hotel with her maid of honor, following some tradition about the bride and groom not seeing each other before the ceremony. Grandma Helen arrived at noon to help Daniel get dressed in his suit. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept much either. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered while Dad was in the shower. "Once you stand up in that church, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure," Daniel said, even though he wasn't, not really. He was terrified, but he was also certain that staying silent would be worse. They drove to the church at 2 in the afternoon. The wedding was at 3. Dad seemed nervous but happy, adjusting his tie in the rearview mirror at every stoplight. Daniel sat in the back seat, his stomach in knots, going over what he planned to say. The church was already filling up with guests when they arrived. Daniel recognized some people from Dad's work, a few distant relatives he'd met at Mom's funeral, and lots of faces he didn't know at all. Victoria's side of the church was packed with people Daniel had never seen before. For someone who claimed not to be close to her family, she sure had a lot of guests. Dad disappeared to get ready with the officiant, leaving Daniel and Grandma Helen to take their seats in the front row. As Daniel sat down on the hard wooden pew, he felt the weight of what he was about to do settle over him like a heavy blanket. People filed past them, smiling and nodding. An older woman stopped to tell Grandma Helen how wonderful it was that Robert was finding love again. A man in an expensive suit mentioned something about Victoria being such a catch. Each comment made Daniel's resolve stronger. None of these people knew the truth. The organ music started and everyone stood up. Daniel's legs felt shaky as he rose. He turned to see Victoria at the back of the church standing with her father. She looked perfect, like something out of a magazine. Her dress sparkled under the lights, and she had this serene smile on her face that made her look almost angelic. But Daniel noticed other things too. How her eyes kept darting around the room, landing on different people, never quite settling anywhere. How her hand clutched her father's arm just a little too tightly. How when her gaze swept across the crowd and landed on Daniel, her smile faltered for just a second. "She knows," Daniel thought. "She knows I'm going to do something." Victoria began her walk down the aisle. The guests sighed and whispered about how beautiful she looked. Daniel's dad stood at the altar, tears actually streaming down his face. He was so happy. Daniel felt his own eyes burning, but for completely different reasons. When Victoria reached the altar, she handed her bouquet to her maid of honor, a woman with bleached blonde hair who Daniel had never seen before. Dad took Victoria's hands and they turned to face the officiant. The ceremony began. The officiant, a man named Reverend Matthews who Daniel had met once before, talked about love and commitment and the sanctity of marriage. He read from the Bible about two becoming one. Victoria and Dad stared into each other's eyes, and if Daniel didn't know better, he'd think she really loved him. But he did know better. He'd seen the text messages. He'd heard her phone conversation with Kevin. He knew what came after the I do's. Grandma Helen's hand found his shoulder, warm and steady. Daniel glanced at her and she gave him a small nod. She was with him no matter what happened next. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, Reverend Matthews was saying, but with careful consideration and full honesty between partners. The irony wasn't lost on Daniel. Full honesty. Victoria didn't know the meaning of the phrase. If anyone has reason why these two should not be wed, Reverend Matthews said, his voice solemn and formal. Speak now or forever hold your peace. This was it. The moment Daniel had been dreading and preparing for. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. His hands were sweating. His whole body wanted to stay seated, to stay quiet, to not cause a scene. But his mom's voice echoed in his head. Being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs to be done even though you're terrified. Grandma Helen's hand squeezed his shoulder, firm and encouraging. Daniel stood up. The church went completely silent. It was like someone had hit a pause button on the whole world. 200 people turned to stare at him. I object, Daniel said. His voice came out quieter than he intended, almost a whisper. He cleared his throat and said it again, louder. I object. The gasps that followed were like a wave rolling through the church. People started whispering to each other, confused and shocked. At the altar, Victoria's face went pale. Dad's went red. Daniel, Dad said through gritted teeth. Sit down. No, Dad, I can't. Daniel's voice was shaking, but he pressed on. He pulled out his tablet from where he'd hidden it in his jacket pocket. I'm sorry, but Victoria isn't who you think she is. This is ridiculous, Victoria said with a nervous laugh. Robert, your son is having some kind of episode. Maybe we should take a break and... She's been photographing your financial documents, Daniel interrupted, looking at his dad. I saw her in your office 2 weeks ago. She was taking pictures of your bank statements, your investment papers, everything. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Dad looked like he'd been slapped. Daniel, we talked about this. She wasn't organizing anything, Daniel said. He held up his tablet, showing the screen to the crowd. She's been texting with someone named Kevin about stealing money from you after the wedding. Let me see that, Dad said, moving toward Daniel. But Victoria grabbed his arm. Robert, don't, she said. This is clearly fabricated. Your son has been trying to sabotage our relationship from the beginning. Grandma Helen stood up then, pulling papers from her purse. Then explain why you've been married twice before under different names, she said loudly. Once as Victoria Mendoza and once as Victoria Martinez. Both marriages ended with allegations of theft. Both times you disappeared and changed your name. The church erupted in noise now, everyone talking at once. Reverend Matthews looked completely lost, like this was definitely not covered in his wedding officiating manual. Victoria's face changed. The sweet, innocent bride expression melted away, replaced by something hard and cold. You have no proof of any of that. We have public records, Grandma Helen said. Marriage certificates, divorce filings, police reports, all available to anyone who bothers to look. Robert, Victoria turned to Daniel's dad, her voice pleading now. You know me. You love me. Are you really going to let them ruin our special day with these lies? Dad looked torn. Daniel could see the conflict on his face, the war between what he wanted to believe and what the evidence was telling him. He looked at Daniel, at Grandma Helen, then back at Victoria. Show me the texts, Dad said quietly. Robert. No, Victoria started. Show me the texts. Daniel, Dad said more firmly. Daniel walked up to the altar, everyone watching him. He handed his tablet to his dad. The photo of Victoria's phone screen was crystal clear. The message from Kevin about getting account numbers and moving fast after the wedding right there in black and white. And Victoria's response about how Dad trusted her completely. Dad stared at the screen for a long moment. The silence in the church was deafening. Daniel watched his father's face, saw the exact moment when the truth finally broke through. Dad's expression crumbled, the happiness and hope draining away, replaced by betrayal and hurt. Is this real? Dad asked Victoria, his voice barely above a whisper. I can explain, Victoria started. Is this real? Dad repeated louder now. Victoria looked around the church, at all the people staring at her, at the exits that suddenly seemed very far away. Daniel saw her calculating, trying to figure out if she could still talk her way out of this. You know what? Victoria said, her voice changing completely. Gone was the sweet, loving bride-to-be. In her place was someone cold and sharp. Forget this. You're not even worth the effort. She grabbed her bouquet from the maid of honor, turned, and started walking toward the back of the church. But before she could reach the door, a man stood up from one of the back pews. "Going somewhere?" the man asked. He pulled out a badge. "I'm Detective Rodriguez. We've been looking for you for a while now, Miss Mendoza. Or is it Martinez? Hard to keep track." Victoria froze. For a second, Daniel thought she might make a run for it anyway. But then two more people in plain clothes stood up from different parts of the church, and Victoria seemed to realize she was trapped. "This is harassment," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "I haven't done anything wrong." "We'll sort that out at the station," Detective Rodriguez said. He walked down the aisle toward her. "We have some questions about a fraud investigation out of Henderson County, and we'd love to talk to you about your partner, Kevin Turner." At the mention of Kevin's name, what little color remained in Victoria's face drained away completely. She looked at Dad one more time, and Daniel saw something that might have been regret flash across her features. Or maybe it was just frustration at getting caught. "You're making a mistake," Victoria said to the detective, but she went with him peacefully as he escorted her out of the church. Her maid of honor and several other guests from Victoria's side quickly got up and left as well, probably not wanting to be associated with what was happening. The church remained silent as they watched Victoria being led away. Then slowly, the whisper started again, growing louder and louder as people processed what they'd just witnessed. Dad stood at the altar, still holding Daniel's tablet, looking completely lost. The wedding decorations suddenly seemed ridiculous, all that white and silver and flowers celebrating a union that was never going to happen. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat awkwardly. "I think perhaps we should all take a moment." But Dad wasn't listening. He set the tablet down on the altar and walked to Daniel. For a second, Daniel thought his dad might yell at him for ruining the wedding, for making a scene, for being right when Dad had wanted so badly for him to be wrong. Instead, Dad pulled Daniel into a fierce hug. His shoulders were shaking, and Daniel realized his father was crying. "I'm sorry," Dad whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you. You tried to tell me and I wouldn't hear it. You saved me, Daniel. You saved us." Daniel hugged his dad back, feeling his own tears finally spill over. "I just didn't want to lose you too," he said. They stood there for a long moment in front of all those people, holding on to each other while the wedding that would never be fell apart around them. Grandma Helen kept her word. The next morning, she called Daniel before school and told him she'd reached out to an old friend whose daughter worked for the county clerk's office. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "These things take time," she told Daniel, "but if Victoria is hiding something, we'll find it." The days that followed were some of the hardest of Daniel's life. He had to act normal around Victoria, pretending he didn't know anything, while inside he felt like he might explode from the anxiety. Every time she smiled at Dad, every time she talked about the wedding plans, Daniel wanted to scream the truth. But he and Grandma Helen had agreed they needed more evidence first. Victoria seemed to sense nothing. She continued planning the wedding like everything was perfect. She'd leave bridal magazines around the house, talk about flower arrangements and seating charts, and show Dad photos of cakes on her phone. To anyone watching, she looked like an excited bride. But Daniel saw through it now. Every time she laughed at Dad's jokes or kissed his cheek, all Daniel could think about was that text message. "We need to move fast after the wedding." School became Daniel's escape, at least there. He could focus on normal things like algebra tests and soccer practice. His best friend Tyler noticed something was off, though. "You've been weird lately," Tyler said one day at lunch. "Is everything okay?" Daniel wanted to tell him. He wanted to tell someone his own age, someone who might understand. But how could he explain that his dad's fiancée was probably a criminal? It sounded like something from a movie, not real life. "Just stressed about the wedding," Daniel said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "It's a lot." Tyler seemed to accept that answer. "Yeah, I guess that makes sense. My mom got remarried last year and it was pretty weird at first, but it gets better, I promise." Daniel nodded, but inside he thought that Tyler's situation was nothing like his. Tyler's stepmom wasn't planning to rob his dad blind. 3 days after Daniel talked to his grandmother, she called him to come over after school again. This time when he arrived, she wasn't alone. There was a woman sitting on the couch, maybe in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had a kind face, but her eyes were serious. "Daniel, this is Jennifer," Grandma Helen said. "She's Linda's daughter. Linda is the friend I told you about." Jennifer shook Daniel's hand like he was an adult, which he appreciated. Too many grown-ups treated him like a little kid. Your grandmother told me what you saw, Jennifer said. I want you to know that what you're doing takes a lot of courage. Not many kids your age would speak up like this. Daniel felt his face get warm. I just don't want my dad to get hurt. I understand, Jennifer said. She pulled out a folder from her bag. I need to be clear about something first. I work for the county, but I'm here as a favor to my mom, not in any official capacity. What I'm about to share with you is public record, things anyone could find if they knew where to look, but I can't do any kind of official investigation without cause. Do you understand? Daniel and his grandmother both nodded. Jennifer opened the folder. I looked into Victoria Chen. That is the name your father knows her by, correct? Yes, Daniel said. Well, here's the thing. Victoria Chen has only existed for about 5 years. Before that, there's no record of her. No birth certificate, no school records, nothing. What does that mean? Daniel asked. It probably means Victoria Chen isn't her real name, Jennifer explained. People change their names legally sometimes for good reasons, but usually there's still a paper trail. With her, it's like she appeared out of nowhere 5 years ago. Grandma Helen leaned forward. So she's using a fake name? Maybe not fake exactly, Jennifer said. But definitely not the name she was born with. I did some digging and I found something interesting. There was a woman named Victoria Mendoza who got married in the next county over about 7 years ago. The marriage lasted 18 months. After the divorce, there were allegations of financial impropriety, but nothing was ever proven. What's financial impropriety? Daniel asked. It means stealing money or tricking someone out of their money, Jennifer explained gently. The husband claimed Victoria had taken money from their joint accounts and some of his business investments. But by the time he realized it, she'd already filed for divorce and the money was gone. He tried to get it back through the courts, but Victoria claimed it was her share of the marital assets. Without clear proof of fraud, the judge let it go. Daniel felt cold all over. Did she do it again? Marry someone else and steal from them? Jennifer flipped a page in her folder. That's where it gets tricky. After the divorce from the first husband, Victoria Mendoza seemed to disappear. Then about 2 years later, there's a marriage record for a Victoria Martinez in a different county. That marriage also lasted less than 2 years. That husband filed a police report claiming identity theft and fraud, but again, nothing was ever proven. Victoria Martinez disappeared right after the divorce. And now she's Victoria Chen, Grandma Helen said, her voice hard. Going after my son. Jennifer nodded slowly. It looks that way. The timing would be right. Victoria Chen appeared about a year after Victoria Martinez disappeared. Same age, same general appearance based on the photos I found. Can you prove it's the same person? Daniel asked. His heart was racing. This was exactly what they needed. That's the problem, Jennifer said. I can show these records exist and I can point out the suspicious pattern. But legally proving it's the same woman would require more resources than I have access to. You'd need to file a police report, get them to investigate officially, maybe even hire a private investigator. What about the man she's working with? Kevin? Daniel showed Jennifer the photo he'd taken of the text message. Jennifer studied it carefully. This is good. This shows intent, but I can't trace a phone number without official authority. What I can tell you is that there's a man named Kevin Turner who has a criminal record for identity theft and check fraud. He served 2 years in prison and got out about 5 years ago. 5 years, Grandma Helen said. The same time Victoria Chen appeared. Exactly, Jennifer said. I can't prove they're working together, but the timing is suspicious. She closed the folder and looked at both of them seriously. Here's what I think you should do. Take this information to Robert. Show him the evidence Daniel collected and the pattern I found in the public records. Let him make the decision about whether to involve the police. Daniel's stomach twisted into knots. What if he doesn't believe us? He got really mad last time Grandma tried to tell him something was wrong. Then you've done everything you can, Jennifer said softly. Sometimes people need to make their own mistakes. But at least you'll know you tried to warn him. After Jennifer left, Daniel and his grandmother sat in silence for a while. The folder Jennifer had left behind sat on the coffee table between them, full of evidence that might save Dad, or might make him hate them both. When should we tell him? Daniel finally asked. Grandma Helen sighed. Soon, the wedding is in 10 days. We can't wait much longer. They decided to do it that weekend, Saturday morning, when Dad would be home and hopefully in a good mood. Grandma Helen would come over for breakfast, and they'd sit Dad down together and show him everything they'd found. The next few days dragged by like time was moving through mud. Daniel felt like he was carrying a boulder around, the weight of what he knew pressing down on him constantly. He caught Victoria looking at him a few times with an expression he couldn't quite read. Did she suspect he knew something? Or was he just being paranoid? On Thursday night, 2 days before they planned to talk to Dad, something happened that made everything worse. Daniel was in his room doing homework when he heard Victoria on the phone in the hallway. She was talking in a low, urgent voice, and even though Daniel knew he shouldn't eavesdrop, he crept to his door and listened. "No, we can't wait any longer," Victoria was saying. "I need to move up the timeline. There's been some weird energy from the kid. I think he might suspect something." Daniel's blood turned to ice. She was talking about him. "I'll get the account information tonight," Victoria continued. "Once we're married, it'll be easier. But I'm not taking any chances. Just have everything ready to move fast on Monday, right after the wedding." There was a pause while whoever was on the other end talked. "Of course, I'm sure," Victoria said, her voice sharp now. "I've done this before, Kevin. I know what I'm doing." "Just be ready, Kevin." There it was. Confirmation that the person on the other end was the same Kevin from the text. Victoria's footsteps moved away down the hall toward the bedroom she'd been staying in some nights. Daniel stood frozen in his doorway, his heart hammering. They'd moved up the timeline. They were planning to steal the money right after the wedding, maybe even before. He couldn't wait until Saturday to tell Dad. That might be too late. Daniel grabbed his phone and called his grandmother. "We need to talk to Dad now," he said as soon as she answered. "Tonight. Victoria knows I suspect something, and they're planning to take the money right after the wedding." His grandmother didn't argue. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When she arrived, Dad was confused. "Mom, what's going on? It's almost 8 o'clock on a school night." "We need to talk, Robert," Grandma Helen said. "All of us. It's about Victoria." Daniel watched his father's face change. The confusion shifted to frustration, then to anger. "If this is more conspiracy theories about—" "Just listen," Grandma Helen cut him off. "Please, Robert. 5 minutes. If you still think we're wrong after that, we'll leave and never bring it up again." Dad looked at Daniel, who nodded. "Please, Dad, it's important." With a heavy sigh, Dad sat down on the couch. "Fine, 5 minutes." Daniel pulled out his tablet and showed Dad the photo of the text message. Then he explained what he'd seen in the office, how Victoria had been photographing the documents. Grandma Helen added what Jennifer had found: the pattern of marriages and divorces, the allegations of theft, the criminal partner named Kevin. As they talked, Daniel watched his father's face go through a dozen different emotions: disbelief, anger, confusion, and finally, something that looked like fear mixed with hurt. "You're wrong," Dad said, but his voice wasn't as firm as before. "Victoria loves me. She wouldn't—" "Robert, look at the evidence," Grandma Helen pleaded. "The text message alone should tell you something's not right." But Dad stood up, shaking his head. "No, this is ridiculous. Daniel, you probably just saw her doing what she said, organizing files, and this text could mean anything. You're reading what you want into it because you don't want me to move on from your mother." "Dad, that's not—" "Enough!" Dad's voice was louder now, sharp enough that Daniel flinched. "I've listened to your 5 minutes, and I think you're both so stuck in the past that you can't accept that I deserve to be happy again. Victoria has been nothing but kind to both of you, and this is how you repay her? By making up stories and digging through public records trying to find dirt? We're trying to protect you," Grandma Helen said. "I don't need protecting," Dad said coldly. "I need my family to support me. Can you do that, or are you going to keep sabotaging my happiness?" Daniel felt tears burning his eyes. "Dad, please. I wouldn't make this up." But his father's face was hard now, closed off. "The wedding is in 2 days. You're both welcome to come, but only if you can be there without causing drama. If you can't support this marriage, then maybe it's better if you don't come at all." He walked out of the room and they heard his footsteps going up the stairs. A moment later, a door slammed. Grandma Helen put her arm around Daniel, who was trying not to cry. "We did what we could," she said softly. "It wasn't enough," Daniel whispered. That night, lying in bed, Daniel made a decision. Dad wouldn't listen to reason. The evidence wasn't enough to convince him. But maybe if Daniel spoke up at the wedding, in front of all those people, Dad would have to listen. It would be humiliating. It would probably make Dad hate him. but at least he'd know that Daniel tried everything to save him. 2 days until the wedding. 2 days to figure out exactly what he was going to say when he stood up in that church and told the truth that no one wanted to hear. 2 weeks before the wedding, Daniel had come home from school early. It was one of those half days when the teachers had conferences and the students got sent home after lunch. Dad was supposed to pick him up, but he'd texted saying he was stuck in a meeting and asked if Daniel could take the bus home. Victoria would be there, the text said, so Daniel wouldn't be alone. Daniel didn't mind. He actually preferred taking the bus with his friends anyway. They joked around the whole ride, and Tyler had shared his bag of chips even though Daniel forgot his lunch money that morning. By the time Daniel walked up to their house, he was in a pretty good mood. The front door was unlocked, which meant Victoria was definitely home like Dad had said. Daniel walked in, dropped his backpack by the stairs like he always did, even though it drove Dad crazy, and headed toward the kitchen to grab a snack. That's when he heard the noise from Dad's office. The office was just off the living room, a small room where Dad kept all his important papers and did work sometimes when he brought stuff home. The door was usually closed, but today it was open just a crack. Daniel could see movement inside through the gap. He almost called out to Victoria to let her know he was home. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the way she was moving, quick and nervous. Maybe it was the fact that she was in Dad's office at all, which seemed weird since she had no reason to be in there. Daniel moved closer, being quiet without really knowing why. Through the crack in the door, he could see Victoria standing at Dad's filing cabinet. The drawer was open and she had a stack of papers in one hand. In her other hand was her phone, and she was taking pictures of the documents. Daniel's stomach dropped. He stood there frozen, watching as Victoria photographed page after page. Bank statements, investment papers, the life insurance documents from when Mom died. Victoria wasn't just glancing at them. She was being systematic, making sure she got clear photos of everything, checking her phone screen to make sure the numbers were readable. Daniel must have made a sound. Or maybe his shadow moved, because Victoria suddenly looked up. Her eyes met his through the crack in the door, and for a second she looked terrified. Actually terrified, like someone caught doing something they knew was very wrong. But then, in the span of maybe 2 seconds, her whole face changed. The fear disappeared, replaced by that smooth smile she always wore. She quickly set the papers down and walked to the door, opening it wider. "Daniel, you're home early. You startled me," she said, laughing a little. Her voice sounded normal, but Daniel noticed her hand was shaking slightly as she brushed her hair behind her ear. "What were you doing?" Daniel asked. His voice came out quieter than he meant it to, almost like he was the one who'd been caught doing something wrong. "Oh, your dad asked me to organize some of his files. You know how messy he can be with paperwork," Victoria said smoothly. She gestured toward the filing cabinet like it was no big deal. "I was just taking some photos so I could remember what goes where." Easier than writing it all down. It sounded reasonable. It could have been true. But Daniel had seen her face before she'd composed herself. That wasn't the face of someone doing a favor. That was the face of someone who'd been caught. "Does Dad know you're doing this today?" Daniel asked. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. "Of course. He mentioned it this morning before he left for work." "Didn't he tell you?" Daniel shook his head. Victoria's smile tightened just a little bit. "Well, you know your dad. Always forgetting to mention things," she said. "Anyway, I'm almost done here. Are you hungry? I could make you a snack." "I'm okay," Daniel said. He wanted to get away from her, to go to his room and think about what he'd just seen. "I have homework." "All right, sweetie," Victoria said, using a term she never called him when Dad wasn't around. "I'll be down here if you need anything." Daniel grabbed his backpack and went upstairs to his room. He closed the door and sat on his bed, his mind racing. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe Dad had asked her to organize his files. But why would she need photos of bank statements and investment papers? And why would she look so scared when she first saw him? He thought about texting his dad to ask if he'd really told Victoria to go through his office, but something stopped him. If Victoria was lying, asking Dad would just tip her off that Daniel was suspicious. And if she was telling the truth, Daniel would look paranoid and jealous, like he was trying to cause problems. For the next few days, Daniel watched Victoria more carefully. He started noticing things he'd overlooked before. How she was always on her phone, typing quickly and then deleting messages. How she'd step outside to take calls even when it was cold. How she'd get defensive if anyone asked about her past or her family. At dinner one night, Dad had asked Victoria about her parents, saying he'd love to meet them before the wedding. Victoria had gotten this tight look on her face and said they weren't close, that they didn't approve of her life choices, and she'd rather not talk about it. Dad had apologized and changed the subject, but Daniel noticed how quickly Victoria had shut that conversation down. Then, about a week after Daniel had caught her in the office, something else happened. Daniel was in the kitchen doing homework at the table while Victoria was making coffee. Her phone was on the counter and it buzzed with a text message. Victoria was facing the coffee maker with her back turned, so she didn't see the screen light up. But Daniel did. The message was from someone named Kevin. Daniel couldn't read the whole thing, but he saw enough. "Did you get the account numbers? We need to move fast after the wedding." Daniel's blood ran cold. He stared at the phone, reading those words over and over in the few seconds before the screen went dark again. Victoria turned around with her coffee mug and Daniel quickly looked back down at his math homework, his heart pounding. "Everything okay?" Victoria asked. She must have noticed something on his face. "Yeah, just stuck on this problem," Daniel lied, pointing at a random equation on the page. Victoria glanced at the phone on the counter, but the screen was dark. She had no idea Daniel had seen anything. She took a sip of her coffee and left the kitchen, heading upstairs. As soon as she was gone, Daniel pulled out his tablet from his backpack. His hands were shaking as he opened the camera app. He set it on the counter, angled toward where Victoria had left her phone, and waited. 20 minutes later, Victoria came back down. Her phone buzzed again. She picked it up, read the message, and started typing a response. While she was focused on her screen, Daniel casually reached over and grabbed his tablet, pretending he needed it for homework. He'd already taken a photo of her phone screen when it lit up with that message. That night in his room, Daniel looked at the photo he'd taken. The message was clear enough to read. "Did you get the account numbers? We need to move fast after the wedding." And Victoria's response, which he'd managed to capture. "Working on it. He trusts me completely. Another week and we'll have everything we need." Daniel felt sick to his stomach. This was real. Victoria wasn't just organizing files for Dad. She was stealing information. And whoever Kevin was, they were in on it together. But what was Daniel supposed to do with this information? If he showed Dad, would he even believe him? Dad was so happy with Victoria. He'd already gotten defensive when Grandma Helen expressed concerns. What if Dad thought Daniel had edited the photos or made the whole thing up because he didn't want him to remarry? Daniel thought about his mom. She'd always taught him to do the right thing, even when it was hard.